They say you should never go back to your ex, but that doesn't stop several F1 teams and drivers rekindling old relationships, hoping the magic hasn't been lost. We've picked our 10 favourite stories of reuniting in F1 for this list, but there were so many others we could have picked, so make sure you let us know in the comments which pairings would make your top 10. Number 10. Michael Schumacher and Mercedes. Okay, so we're starting things off by clearly breaking the rules, but we wanted to make an exception for this one because of how unlikely it seemed and how emotive it was to see Schumacher finally race for the Silver Arrows in F1. Schumacher was prepared for superstardom by the Mercedes Junior program at the start of the 1990s, and Mercedes even paid for his F1 debut with Jordan at Spa. They were going to help foot the bill of $3.5 million for at least 2 years with Jordan, until Benetton swooped in, offering a more competitive car and no need for Schumacher to bring cash. Schumacher came close to linking up with the three-pointed star a couple of times after that, with Sauber fighting Benetton for his services when it stepped into F1 with Mercedes' help, and McLAREN trying to sign him for 1996, by which point it was the Mercedes Works team. Nearly 2 decades after he'd last driven for Mercedes in sports cars, Schumacher was its shock signing when it bought Brawn for 2010. Success was hard to come by, and had Schumacher been willing to commit to a new contract sooner in 2012, Mercedes might never have discovered there was a chance to prize Lewis Hamilton away from McLaren. Number 9. Nico Hulkenberg and Force India. Hulkenberg moved up from reserve driver to a race role with Force India for 2012, then moved to Sauber for a year and returned in 2014. He spent the next 3 years alongside Sergio Perez, helping the team climb the table all the way to its first 4th place finish in the championship in 2016 before moving to Renault. The Hulk even managed a 3rd stint with the team in 2020, making 3 appearances as Racing Point's COVID super sub when Perez and then Lance Stroll tested positive for the virus. It was a short but eventful return, featuring a failure to start, a remarkable 3rd place on the grid, and then a points finish from the back after being called up on Saturday morning at the Nürburgring. Number 8. Daniil Kvyat and Toro Rosso. Red Bull has since pulled the same trick with Pierre Gasly, which makes this one slightly less special, but it happened to Kvyat first, and the weirdness of his F1 career didn't stop there. The 2016 season was just 4 races old when Kvyat became the first driver to get demoted from Red Bull Racing to Toro Rosso, making way for the irresistible force of Max Verstappen. Kvyat stayed with the team until being dropped after 14 races of 2017, but he came back 3 races later for the US Grand Prix when Pierre Gasly had a clashing commitment in Super Formula. He spent 2018 as Ferrari's simulator driver, only to be called back to Toro Rosso again for 2019 when Red Bull suffered a driver shortage after Daniel Ricciardo's surprise move to Renault. He was dropped again at the end of 2020, so place your bets on when Red Bull will need him again in the future. Number 7. Johnny Herbert and Benetton. Herbert's first stint with Benetton was much shorter than it should have been. The team benched him after just 6 races of 1989 when it became clear the horrific injuries he'd suffered in a Formula 3000 crash the previous year were still affecting him badly. Officially, he was bumped down to reserve driver for 3 months in the middle of the season, but he says he knew he'd never race for the team again. Except in the end, he did. Herbert returned to Benetton for the final 2 races of 1994 and then raced full-time the following year, winning 2 races before moving on to Sauber. Number 6. Alain Prost and McLaren. Prost is synonymous with McLaren's golden era of the 1980s, winning 3 world championships and 30 races from 1984 to 89. But it's often forgotten that he got his F1 break with McLaren in 1980 before moving on to Renault after 1 disappointing season. By the time Prost returned after 3 years away, Ron Dennis had taken over McLaren and turned it into a very different team to the one Prost left. Prost could have been even higher up this list, having twice came close to rejoining McLaren for a 3rd time. He decided against a return in 1994 after testing in pre-season, then tested again in 1995 before eventually deciding to stay retired. Number 5. Giancarlo Fisichella. Team Silverstone, and Team ENSTONE. Fisichella is the first of the drivers we chose who managed to go back to 2 teams during his career. He marked himself out as a star of the future with Jordan in 1997 before leaving to spend 4 years with Benetton. He then left Benetton to go back to Jordan for another 2 seasons, remarkably picking up a win in 2003 when the team had already started falling backwards down the order. After a year with Sauber, he returned to what used to be Benetton and was now Renault. He couldn't match up to Fernando Alonso as the Spaniard won his 2 World Championships in 2005 and 6, and Fisichella wasn't able to step into Alonso's team leader shoes in 2007 as Renault slipped back. After that, he went back to what used to be Jordan for a 3rd time, playing a key role in establishing Force India as a credible team. His last act was to finish 2nd in the Belgian Grand Prix from pole position in 2009 before finishing his F1 career with a disappointing run at Ferrari. Number 4. Kimi Raikkonen, Ferrari and Sauber. Raikkonen has bookended his F1 career with Sauber. He was a controversial signing in 2001 with only Formula Renault experience to his name and initially started racing in F1 under probation. 17 years later, with 21 wins and a World Championship to his name, he returned just as Sauber was rebranded as Alfa Romeo for 2019. In between, he also managed 2 spells at Ferrari. Having won the World Championship at the first attempt with the team in 2007, a couple of years later he was paid off by Ferrari to make way for Fernando Alonso's arrival in 2010, and he then returned after time away in rallying, a dalliance with NASCAR and an F1 comeback with Lotus to be Alonso's teammate in 2014. Raikkonen never quite recaptured the old magic and was no match for Alonso, but he spent 4 more years there alongside Sebastian Vettel, picking up the only win of his 2nd stint towards the end of his final season when Ferrari had already decided to replace him with Charles Leclerc. Number 3. Gerhard Berger, Ferrari and Benetton. Berger didn't win a World Championship for either of the teams he doubled up at, but he did win races across all 4 spells. He took Benetton's first win in 1986 before leaving for Ferrari and claimed the final victory of his career back with Benetton in 1997, having just missed 3 races that summer. At Ferrari, he won 4 races in 3 years first time around, and then came back after 3 years at McLAREN, taking another significant win in 1994 as he ended Ferrari's drought at the German Grand Prix. Number 2. Nigel Mansell and Williams. Mansell is the interloper in the top half of our list, as he's not here because he took in multiple spells at more than one team, but he raced for the same team 3 times and won races in all 3 stints. Mansell became an F1 race winner towards the end of his first season with Williams in 1985, and he was expected to be a solid backup to Nelson Piquet when the Brazilian joined the following season. Instead, Mansell fought hard over the next 2 years, missing out on the 86 and 87 titles in dramatic fashion. When Piquet left, he took Honda with him, and after a difficult year in 1988, Mansell left Williams for Ferrari. He was barely halfway through his 2nd season in red when he suddenly announced his retirement at the British Grand Prix, but Frank Williams was able to talk him out of that to re-sign for 1991. Mansell left Williams acrimoniously as world champion in 1992 following the team's decision to sign Alain Prost, but with the help of Bernie Ecclestone he was called back for 4 races in 1994 after the death of Ayrton Senna. Mansell won the Adelaide finale and expected to stay with Williams for 1995, but the team took the cheaper option of David Coulthard and Mansell embarked on his doomed move to McLaren instead. And if you'd like to hear more about that saga, our Bring Back V10's Classic F1 podcast has an entire episode about it, which we'll put a link to in the description of this video. Number 1. Fernando Alonso, McLaren and Renault. Alonso had to top this list, didn't he? Not only has he been back to 2 of his old teams, but in 2021 he's returned to Team ENSTONE for a 3rd time. His first 2 Renault spells were split by just 1 controversial year at McLaren, and after 2007 it was little surprise to see him seek refuge back at his old team until he moved to Ferrari for 2010. But what was a surprise was that he then went back to McLAREN in 2015, reuniting with Ron Dennis as both sides banked on Honda-powered glory. And we all know how that turned out. To complete the set, Alonso just needs to go back to Ferrari when he's done with Alpine, and maybe he can finish his career with a year at AlphaTauri, which gave him his debut in 2001 when it was Minardi. That's the end of our countdown. Let us know which drivers you think we missed and who you would pick to be number one. Give this video a like and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, that way you'll never miss another video from the race.